All right, let's just jump right into it. So picture this. You get a performance review, a report card, right? But it's not from your boss. It's directly from a divine source. That is exactly what we're looking at today. These 7 incredible messages sent to 7 real, actual communities almost 2,000 years ago, all laid out in the book of Revelation. It's this amazing deep dive into what they were doing right, what they were getting totally wrong, and what it all means.
First things first, let's get our bearings. We're not talking about make-believe places here. These were 7 literal, historical churches all humming along in the 1st century AD. They were all located in what was then the Roman province of Asia, which is basically modern-day Turkey. And as you can see on the map, they kind of formed this natural circuit. It's pretty widely believed that many of these communities were started by the Apostle Paul and his crew, so they had some serious roots.
So, here's the game plan for our little exploration. We're going to start with this whole report card idea. Then we'll dive into the 3 big challenges these churches were up against. You've got intense pressure from the outside, some really dangerous compromises happening on the inside, and of course, that killer of passion, spiritual apathy. And finally, we'll wrap it all up and pull out the big lessons that people are still talking about today.
Okay, so the heart of these messages is really this report card structure. In every single one, Jesus takes a look at the church, points out what they're doing well, the commendations, but then he gets really direct about their weaknesses and their faults. It's this incredible model of encouragement mixed with some serious, necessary correction. And it's so important to get this. Each of the 7 churches gets its own unique message. This is not a one-size-fits-all kind of deal. Their spiritual health is put under the microscope, they're given a very specific way to get back on track, and then there's a promise of a unique reward for those who actually overcome their specific challenge. It's this incredibly personal approach that makes these messages just so powerful.
All right, let's get into our first major challenge, that external pressure. I mean, how did these brand new communities deal with all the opposition from the world around them? Well, 2 churches really shine as examples of just pure endurance. And what's fascinating is that they are the only 2 that get 0 criticism. None. Okay, now this is where it gets super interesting. You look at Smyrna and Philadelphia, and they're both dealing with some serious opposition, which the text calls the synagogue of Satan, likely a group that was claiming to be faithful but was actually working against the church. But look at the difference. Smyrna is told, hey, get ready. It's going to get rough. You need to be faithful even if it costs you your life. But then Philadelphia? They're promised that their opponents will basically be humbled and forced to admit that God loves them. So, same enemy, but 2 wildly different outcomes. How fascinating is that?
So, if pressure from the outside was one thread, you could argue that an even sneakier danger was coming from the inside. Let's talk about the challenge of internal compromise. This is what happens when those clear lines between what you believe and the culture you live in start to get, well, really blurry.
And here's the absolute heart of the problem. It wasn't just that bad ideas were floating around. The real issue was that they were actively tolerating them. You know, just letting these toxic doctrines and behaviors grow right inside the community without anyone saying, hey, wait a minute. This was a huge red flag for several of the churches.
Let's look at a couple of these. You've got the church in Pergamos. This city was a huge hub for worshiping the Roman emperor. The text literally calls it the place where Satan has his throne. So the pressure to just go along to get along was off the charts, and they get called out for tolerating the doctrine of Balaam, which is basically a fancy way of saying they were compromising, telling people it was okay to join in on pagan stuff to fit in socially and keep their businesses afloat. And then you have Thyatira. They get praised for their love and faith actually increasing, but they were tolerating a false prophetess who was teaching that it was fine to go to the trade guild banquets, which were full of idolatry and immorality, just to protect their jobs. It just goes to show, even a growing, loving community can be in real danger when it starts making excuses for compromise.
Okay, on to our 3rd and final challenge. And this one might be the most dangerous of all. Spiritual apathy. This is that scary place where you look alive on the outside. You have all the right activities, but on the inside, you're just going through the motions.
Man, this is one of the most chilling lines you'll ever read. The message to the church in Sardis was basically that their public relations were great, but their reality was a disaster. They had a reputation, a name for being alive and vibrant, but from a divine perspective, they were dead. Their actions just weren't complete, they weren't finished in God's eyes. And if that message to Sardis was chilling, the one to Laodicea was a full-blown 5-alarm spiritual fire. This was a church that was completely fooling itself. They looked around at their wealth and success and thought, we're good. We've made it. We don't need a thing. But the divine diagnosis was the total opposite. They were spiritually wretched, miserable, poor, blind, and naked. I mean, what a terrifying place to be, to think you have it all together when you have nothing at all.
Whew! Okay, so after walking through these really intense spiritual report cards, what are we supposed to do with all this? What are the big takeaways? What are the core lessons that have kept people studying these messages for almost 2,000 years?
It really does boil down to these 5 huge points. First, hang on to that first love, that initial passion and devotion. Second, persevere when things get tough, just like Smyrna. Third, be so careful about the teachings you allow in, unlike Pergamos and Thyatira. Fourth, live with integrity, so your reputation isn't just an empty shell like it was for Sardis. And finally, stay passionate. Don't fall into that trap of self-deception and apathy that absolutely crippled Laodicea.
And that brings us to our final, pretty profound question, one that comes right out of this material. We saw it, right? Both Smyrna and Philadelphia were up against the same kind of enemies. So, why? Why was one told they had to buckle up and endure horrific persecution, while the other was promised this amazing public victory where their enemies would have to bow before them? Was it about their specific situations? The unique spiritual battles they each needed to win? It's a question that just blows up any simple formula and makes you take a much deeper look into the whole mystery of faith, of struggle, and of divine purpose. It really leaves you with a lot to chew on, doesn't it?